seconds, don't they? Till 10:55, or is it just start and don't worry about it? Not rushing anybody. We'll get there. We got slides, Clark? Perfect. That's what I love to hear. All right. So when we started back in July, the first class we taught started with the number 1. All right, and to steal a musical reference like I always do, Three Dog Night said 1 was the loneliest number. Well, I hope after 4 classes here, when we've talked about 1 as far as one accord, one mind, one spirit, and loving one another, that we don't think about 1 being a lonely number anymore. Homothumadon occurred a dozen times in the New Testament, and we studied all 12 of those. Elion occurs over 100 times. And when you refer to love one another, it occurs over 100 times. We're not going to look, obviously, at all 100. Last week, we took 1 John chapter 4, and we just looked at it in detail, going through that whole chapter and how it all fit together, explaining the very different kinds of love that we should have for one another, and how God's love for us is our example that we're to follow. And we said, okay, how can we love if God is love? How can we get to that state? That's where we finished up. All right, so this week we're going to go verse by verse and just take short snippets to get a different way that we could all love one another. So the first one I want everybody to look up is Mark chapter 9, verse 50. And this is going to be audience participation, so we're going to have a lot of readings to be able to do. So if you missed this first one, don't worry, there'll be more. Mark chapter 9, the whole content says 43 through 50, but we're going to start with 50. Clark.
Salt is good, but if the salt should lose its flavor, how can you make it salty? Have salt among yourselves and be at peace with one another.
Being at peace with one another. Oops. Let me go through these. Oops, too fast. Being at peace with one another. And so, what's that mean as far as holding grudges against one another? Being able to talk to one another. Being calm, being around each other. Where you're not anxious. But I found this parallel verse here, because in my Bible it sent me back to Isaiah, and I spent a little bit of time in Isaiah. And so if you could go back to where this reference is, to Isaiah 66, verse 24. It's very end of Isaiah. Anybody got it? 66:24. Clay?
Then they will go forth and look on the corpses of men who have transgressed against me. Their worm will not die, and their fire will not be quenched, and they will be in assurance to all mankind.
So for Mark 50, the verses preceding that, Mark 48, talked about hell. And description of it being that they were in hell. And usually I just go through and I just read everything, and I just say, hell, got it, check. I know what that is. But this time, having the commentary, I went back in there. And it wasn't that they just used the Greek word that was just for Hades, for hell. But this one was more specific in its context of what hell looked like. And it was the valley of Hinnom, or Hinnom. Has anybody heard of that besides Andy? Clark? Right, and so it's a dumpster fire. And it reminded me of being deployed and how that's what we always did. You know, if we couldn't get rid of everything we had, whether sanitary or not. So the solution was, let's just burn it all, not thinking that maybe this would affect our lungs later in life. But we just burned everything to get rid of it because that was supposed to be more sanitary. So I had this picture now of a valley where everybody, comes out of Jerusalem, heads south to this valley, and starts throwing their trash in, and it burns continuously. And I thought about the dung beetles and, those things that just thrive down in there. And then you've got the worms here. And I got this picture now a whole lot clearer than when I just said, oh, that's hell. No, now I had a more vivid understanding of it that I would never have gotten if I didn't have the concordance to go through it. So sometimes taking time to study more than read was a good lesson for me to take home with me from this one. All right, next, being at peace with one another is John 13, verse 14. John chapter 13, verse 14. You'll know it when you get there.
If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet.
Thanks, Mike. To wash one another's feet. So knowing how jacked up my feet have been from being in the military, there's no way I'm letting anybody wash my feet. That's not going to happen. So it's not that he's physically talking about washing each other's feet. What is he really trying to teach the disciples at this point? For serving one another, that act of humility that if Jesus can do this, then I guess I can do it too. That no task should be above you when it comes to serving one another and helping each other out. Clay. It was a required thing you had to do because walking around dusty streets, you're going to have somebody get cleaned up at some point in time, but it was always the servant's job, not the master's job. All right, any other thoughts on the fact that it's, go ahead. So just when we talk about what human nature is, yes, in a perfect world, it would be great if we all got along and everybody was at peace with each other, but it doesn't necessarily happen. And the way I looked at this is it's not just the act. It's not the act of washing somebody's feet. It's your attitude of how you go in and how you go about doing it. So, thanks, Clark. Next one, Romans 12, chapter 12, verse 5. And then if somebody wants to go ahead to the next one, Ephesians 4:25. They both go together. So Romans 12:5 and Ephesians 4:25. That's Romans and then Ephesians.
Therefore, putting away lying, let each one of you speak with truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another.
All right, so two similar verses, not exactly the same, but two similar thoughts. So first from Romans, what's the idea there behind what you're given, these gifts, the possessions?
Everybody's different, but they're members of one body. And even, in some sense, they're members of one another. And somehow united with each other because we're part of the body.
Other thoughts on Ephesians, tying that together? Being part of one body, that we're all together in this.
Odd way to phrase it, sort of read it. I can say, I'm a member of this body, you're a member of this body. We're united together in a common cause. But I wouldn't phrase it, I'm a member of you, you're a member of me. There's some sort of intimacy with all filled with you. It doesn't really come naturally.
You know, I was just thinking the inductive versus deductive type of thinking and conclusions. You know, A plus B equals C, or in this case, C minus B or minus A, and you could start doing it back and forth. But as Clark said, it may seem confusing, but the idea is there that we may all be individuals, but we are all one. We're all together. We all have our common beliefs. We all support each other. We all leave what was our old selves behind, and we've all become our new selves, and we are all in one fight together.
Every member is essential as well. There's no part of your body that you want to discard, or that you want to get rid of. Everyone is essential. Everyone is a part of the entire body.
I just flashed, what's that other one where you got to cut that? If it's doing something wrong, you got to cut it off. Sorry, but yes, you're right, that we're all important. Everybody works together for one function. All right, anything else on that? With the Ephesians piece of it, it's also making sure that when you put on this new body with Christ, that you're leaving all those other things behind you. It's not just talking about clothes. It's talking about behaviors. It's talking about being honest, having integrity with each other, believing in each other. That's leaving your old self. All right. Next one, Romans 12, verse 10. Romans 12, verse 10.
Be devoted to one another in brotherly love, with preference to one another in honor.
So we've done the 4 different Greek words for love many different times. This one, the philia type of love, the brotherly love. But what's the next part of it? Not just how you do it, or what's that level of love, being brotherly love versus family versus erotic versus godly, selfless love. When he's using it in this term, when he's trying to say have love for every brother in the assembly, what's that mean when you're trying to say love one another in that context? Be peaceable. Goes back a little bit to that humility. I had a boss who once told us when we were all there, we had all gotten selected for like the next level type of thing, and we're all in one big group, and he told us all, don't believe your own press. Don't believe all those efficiency reports that were all just, all nice words in there for you. We've all got our shortcomings, we all got our faults, but don't believe your own press. And so in this case, it's another example of, in order to be brothers, it's, accepting that we're all equals. We've all got different talents. We all got different gifts. We've all done different things. But we're all equals, and we all have something to share. Is it my sister? Just kidding.
There is that tension there that if you get too far out of line, you're supposed to be reprimanded by the elders and even removed from the congregation if you get too far out, on the other extreme of this. But certainly we need to have shortcomings, but
As far as being one family and those that have chosen to leave, I mean, just think about, for me, being here the last 20 years now, looking at how many people voluntarily left because they didn't want to be here for whatever reason. You know, it's one thing if we're in the military and every 2 years we're moving, yeah, we go to another congregation, another congregation, another congregation. But we left because the military moved us to another spot, not because we said we no longer, agree with Brother Gaines, so we're leaving. Think of how many people were here that are no longer here, and why. And I mean, some of them we reached out to and tried, but they were set and they were going to go. Sir. And we've had times when just because of pure distance, the people that used to worship here are now moved away somewhere and they can't make it. They're getting older. They don't want to drive that far. And so they're going to go worship somewhere else. That's not the disagreements that I was looking at. Everybody's generally welcoming, no matter where we've ever gone. They're always welcoming. It's just who's going to keep you there. And when you do have those disagreements, how do you solve them amongst each other? Who you get to what?
Being
will rule over you. All right. All excellent points. We're just going to go a couple verses forward in Romans 12, the 16th verse. Oops, I could get caught up here on my slides. 16th verse.
Be in agreement with one another. Do not be proud. Instead, associate with the humble. Do not be wise in your own estimation.
Be one in mind. I mean, this is a hard one. Some things, I talked about the church survey way back when, Sue, and we thought, okay, no problem. Everybody's going to answer the same thing to this one. And I was way off on that one. It was like, what? Only 26%? And so, being of that one mind, that one accord that we talked about before, being of one mind to truly love one another. That both our beliefs line up with what we practice. That's the other part about these actions in here. It's one thing to say it or believe it. It's another thing to actually do it and show it. And in here, he's commanding us to be that way, be of one mind toward one another. All right. Any other thoughts on this one? I'm going to keep with Romans here. 13:8. Owe no man anything, owe nothing except love. So what's that as far as conditional? Unconditional, you don't owe him anything except everything.
The context is don't go into debt, pay your taxes, don't owe anyone anything. Except,
Right, because Romans 12 is talking about being a servant. Romans 13 is your subjugation to the state, the fellow citizens, the government. And so that's all in this context of what he's trying to say is, yes, you got to pay your taxes and that kind of stuff. Yes, you got to follow the rules of society. But don't feel like don't be in debt to somebody. Which you can't buy. All right. Any other thoughts? Guys are quiet this morning. More so than usual. All right. Maybe you're getting tired of going over these love one another verses. All right. Romans, 14, 13, and 19. Romans 14, verses 13 and verse 19.
Therefore, let us not judge one another anymore, but rather determine this, not to put an obstacle or a stumbling block in a brother's way. 19. So then we pursue the things which make for peace and the building up of one another.
Thanks, Robin. How hard is it for us to not judge somebody, to not make an assessment based on whatever, as soon as you see somebody, and not have anything click in your mind that something happened before? Whether it's something as simple as, somebody's walking with a cane, so maybe they just had their hip replaced. You're going to start making these things and connections in your head, but when does that turn from just an observation to being a judgment? What happens in your brain or your heart that changes it from just you collecting data and making, those connections to now it being a judgment?
always come naturally. Pride always, relatively way of thinking, relatively way of behaving.
I don't think it always has to be a negative when you say judgment, because I could sit in here and just look around and say, okay, the three elders in this room are, Bill, Jim, George, because they're all wearing ties and a jacket. I could come up with that conclusion and say, well, they're obviously the most honorable men here, and so that's how they got selected as an elder. And so I could make those crazy leaps if I wanted to.
I think part of maturing in Christ is working on the ability to absolutely not make any kind of judgment whatsoever. In other words, when you meet someone or you see something or whatever, to not make any assumptions whatsoever and not make any judgment whatsoever. Whether, oh, there's a guy wearing a tie. Why has he got his tie? Or there's a guy over there in a white shirt. Or that person who cut me off while we were at the stop sign. Or whatever. You can train yourself to not have, to be totally neutral in a sense. But like Clark said, it takes a lot of work.
That's a lot of practice, Andy. And that's, as we've been talking about, going to a more mature Christian view on things. Robin, you were saying?
I don't think we're capable of looking at people the way God sees people. That might be our second thought, but it's never going to be our first thought because we are not God. You cannot see that person. God is already there. Now, I may look at someone and think something negative or positive, and my second thought might be, that's one of God's children. But that's never going to be my first thought. Because if it were, if I were able to look at people the way God looks at them, I wouldn't have a negative thought. There would be no filter that I would have to pass things through to make any kind of judgment at all.
The thing I came back to, though, when I was listening to this was thinking, I missed it with my kids, but I saw it with my grandkids. You know, when they're 3, they have no fear. They will go up, they will hug everybody, they will love everybody. Even if you don't give them candy, they will still, be there, And then they start getting older, and then they start, not being as open to that. But when they're at that age, 2 to 3, they love everybody, they hug everybody, they don't care. And
Another scripture that says we are to be judges of the church. If you see a brother or sister committing a terrible sin, and you don't correct them, then you're almost as bad as they are. I don't know what kind of judgment you're talking about. Whether somebody wears a tie, that's nothing. Absolutely nothing. We have a wonderful scripture that we need to look at it sometime.
the tie thing, the second verse that Robin read about not being a stumbling block. I mean, for years, we, had all the ties in that back room, because if one of us forgot to wear a tie and we're going to serve on the table, we better have a tie. Otherwise, that's all somebody would be looking at, and we'd be serving as a stumbling block to them being able to worship, because they wouldn't be thinking about the words. They just say, why didn't Jay wear a tie today? And we've moved beyond that, I think. As you said, it's not just about the tie. Might have been Ed McLeod, I don't know. Clark.
It's interesting to think that a lot of times people will evaluate the church. What's its effect on them? What are they getting out of it? Or does this have the kind of programs I would want, or whatever? What about your obligation as a member to build up other members? Because it doesn't say, if you're the preacher, try to build up other people. It said this is just addressed to the whole congregation of believers. Build each other up. So what are you doing that encourages other people? What are you doing that builds them up, that even strengthens them? You don't have to be the preacher or the elder. What are you can give them a task. Not just nice words. You're supposed to build each other up. There's a special responsibility for teachers that we really got us with. They have to really work to build people up. So elders have to work to protect against false teachers and wolves and flock. But everybody's supposed to build up everybody else. Encourage everybody else. Church is pretty good at that. Yeah. Church is good church for that, though. Yeah.
Well, as I was reminded by the 6 bells that rang out there, that I have exceeded time again. I could either continue this next week, or we can switch up teachers. I'll leave that up. If we're burned out on this one, then we'll go to the next one. But thank you, everybody, for your participation today.